Hi, my name is Kian Moses, and today we'll be analyzing the play Sofiatown. Now, Sofiatown was created by the Junction Avenue Theatre Company, and it was sorted by Herman Tobinsky. I'll upload these notes in the description. So, Sofiatown is a workshop play. So, the four stages to a workshop play is the spark, research, improvisation, and selection. So the spark of Sofiatown is that it was based on a real advertisement in which people in Sofiatown were advertising for a white Jewish girl to come live with them, and this inspired the people to write the story. Then the research. The theatre company interviewed people such as Don Matera, who was a gangster and a poet, Courtboy, who was the leader of the American gang, and he demonstrated the mixture between politeness and violence, as well as Jolly Dakile, who was a teacher, property owner, and he lost his home, obviously due to the Native Resettlement Act, and Anthony Sampson, who demonstrated the intellectual life that was present in Sofiatown. On top of interviewing all these people, the theatre company also studied the Drum magazine, which documented the history of Sofiatown. Now, for the third stage of workshop play, it was improvisation. So they improvised scenes. They kept on doing this until they had enough to work with. Examples of this would be when Mr. Fafi bursts into the scene and he just starts reading out his numbers. This was improvised and it became part of the play. Then finally, the last stage is selection. Now, usually this is done by the entire group. What sets Sofiatown apart in its process of being a workshop play is that only one person, Malcolm Perkey, selected all of the scenes. So it's everyone came together, everyone worked together to record and improvise all the scenes. However, only one person subjectively chose which scenes made up the finished product. So that's the workshop play. In the genre, it is a protest play with musical elements. So it's a protest play. It's very political. It talks about the socio-political context, which I'll get into later, about apartheid, the Native Resettlement Act, and so on and so forth. And it's also part of it being a play is that musical and comedic aspect to its genre. So that's the genre of the play. It follows a realistic. It's realistic in that the events are realistic. They're based on real things. It's a realistic timeline, and there's accurate props and costumes used. So that's a realism style. That's the style. Style is realism. And then there's the abstract set. So we had the newspapers for the backdrop. Newspapers, slogans, mottos, and magazines, they all fall out the backdrop for the play. And then obviously there's symbolic props such as Jake's typewriter and Charlie's car seat. Now, the playwright's intentions. So the intentions are to reclaim and popularize a hidden history of struggle. Now, reclaim, to assert equality by usually history is written by the victors, and so by having this play they are reclaiming their history. To popularize, it's very accessible in the form of a play, and it's hidden because a lot of these aren't documented because of apartheid. It's a very niche perspective. Things weren't published about this, so only plays and songs and certain manuscripts like The Long Walk to Freedom actually survived apartheid and were able to be documentation of the other perspective, the marginalized perspective. The language of Sofiatown, it's a realistic language, and it's also stereotypical. So Jake's has a very posh drum English is what it's referred to as. So he's got a very proper English. He speaks in an eloquent and articulate manner. Mingus, he speaks mostly in Sofiatown, so which is a mixture of various different languages, slangs, and we'll get more into that. And then Fafi, He also speaks multiple languages. He can speak drum English, he can speak Tsotsitaal, and he mixes in his Fafi numbers whenever he feels the need to do so. So that's the languages. Let's get into the characters. So Jakes is one of the main characters. He is the archetype. So all the characters are archetypes of certain things where they represent a whole. So Jakes, he's the intellectual. He represents the intellectual life of Sofiatown. We can see that with his typewriter, which he uses for his drum magazine. He's also very protective of Ruth. He protects her from Mingus. He always wants to do more. However, he wants to do more in terms of his career. He wants to be publishing pieces about Sofiatown instead of writing about boxes, and he's very realistic. He's got a realistic mindset where he understands that he cannot pursue a romantic relationship with Ruth. Mingus, he is a gangster. He's a part of the American gang. So he describes himself as an honest gangster because he steals from the poor, he steals from the whites to feed for his family. He provides for his family, like Lulu and Mamariti, paying for his school fees. He's very cocky and arrogant. He thinks he's the best, and he's also very forceful. He tries to force his way with Ruth multiple times. Fafi is a political activist. He brings political information to the characters, so he offers some form of exposition there. He's a ANC member. He's also a gambler, and as we spoke about, he's got his Fafi numbers. Lulu, she represents the black youth. She suffers from the Bantu education system, and it has impacted her pursuit of knowledge. She's also a very curious person. She always asks why, and she's not afraid to speak out her mind. Mamariti, she's the Shebeen queen. She's the owner of the household, and she does everything for her children. Lulu, she's very protective of her and wants the best for her. She's also no nonsense. Her word is the word. Princess is the good time girl. She is a survivor. She survives off of others like Mingus and then later the photographer. She's very self-centered, so her survival is the most important thing. She will leech off of others and protect herself at all costs, which is why she's very defensive when Ruth is introduced, because she thinks of her as competition, unknowing that Mingus would not leave her. Ruth, she's the confused white. She doesn't know whether to identify as Jewish, white, South African, European. She falls in love with Jakes. She's victim to her naivete, so to speak. She wants to fall in love with Jakes. She's naive in that sense. Charlie, he belongs nowhere. As a colored man, he doesn't fit in, so he's always following Mingus around. He's confident with the whites, not with the blacks, because as part of the Native Resettlement Act and with apartheid as large back then, is you had to stick with your racial groups and you couldn't mix between them. And he was also very uneducated. So those are the characters. The Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter was meant to unify black and white people in our country. It's a response to oppression. It's striving for equality. It's a blueprint for the post-apartheid South Africa, and it's everyone being against apartheid. So those are the 5 aspects of the Freedom Charter, and very important, spoken about in the play, referenced to several times by Fafi. Then the play being rebellious is its staging and its backdrop has newspapers, articles and slogans, and they also have lots of protest songs. So all of these document the history of the struggle, and they encourage others to join the fight. So in this way the play showcases its protest aspect. So now Uh, the play also has epic theatre elements. So it's the alienation techniques that it uses is songs. So the songs are example would be Meadowlands. They are used to break the tension. At the height of the tension moments in the play, characters break out into song. It tells the story, and it relays important messages for the reader, as you see with their songs in the later acts and scenes. Then the second thing is the backdrops. So the backdrops would be made up of the posters, slogans, and news articles. So they draw attention and they force the viewer to think about the context of what they're witnessing, what the people were going through at the time, what it meant, and what the Native Resettlement Act would force upon the people. Third thing is multiple roles. Jakes is the character as well as the narrator. This prevents emotional attachment and helps relay exposition and context for the viewer. The fourth thing is they break the fourth wall. Like the last scene with the monologues relate directly to the audience. This breaks tension and immersion, and it forces the viewers to think critically of what they're witnessing. Next are episodic scenes, so such as the Fafi and Ruth scenes where they're reciting the Fafi numbers. These scenes can stand on their own, they don't need any support. This is all part of the alienation techniques. The final sixth thing is symbolic and representative props, like Charlie's chair and Jake's typewriter. It makes you think about the meaning, what do these props represent, so it forces that immersion and break. Next is protest in the play within the characters. So Mingus as a gangster is honest, he steals from the people, putting him down, which is the white people generally. And then Mingus is a provider, so he goes against the stereotypes, and he's actually caring and generous. So Jake is an intellectual. The government didn't want black people to be educated, and his existence, being an educated black person, is protest in itself. Mamariti is the head of the house. So obviously back then, not only were there apartheid, but people as a whole didn't want to empower women, so now she's in this position of power. Mamariti is Shabin. So Shabins were illegal, but hers thrived, and it's keeps the culture alive, and it supports her family. On top of that, she's also owning property of her house and the Shabin. And back then, Sofiatown was one of the only places where you could own property as a black person. Usually, you did not. Jakes is a journalist, so he's exposing the truths of Sofiatown, and he exposes the government. Charlie is a colored person. So the government wanted every race in Sofiatown to be individualized and be in their own communities. And Charlie, being integrated with the family, he's joined them in their community. And Fafi, he's a protester, so he's actively going against apartheid and he's encouraging others to join him. Fafi's also a gambler. Charlie is uneducated. Ruth's existence. She's a white woman in Sofiatown, which is a predominantly black town, which is unheard of, and the government want whites to be above and superior, and she's actively integrating herself and making herself an equal. Ruth's love for Jakes, so that kind of love is illegal, but she feels it anyway. Everyone in her family tells her not to, would tell her things not to do so, but she still has those emotions regardless. And she gets shot down by Jakes. So all of these are examples of ways that the characters are protesting the nationalist government at the time. So now let's go into the socio-political context. So Sofiatown is locally referred to as Kofifi, Sofiatown, and Sophia. So by doing so, it's a rejection of the name that was given to the town, which was enforced by the nationalist government. representing, it was like a rejection of what represents the national government. So they want to be their own unique society without any, without other people putting labels on them. So it's a hub of intellectual activity with poets, activists, writers, and journalists. Example would be like Jake's writing for Drum. That's an example of the socio-political context in which Sofiatown is a hub for intellectual activity. Um, Owned and rented property for income. So Mamariti owns and rents property for income. That's something that happened in Sofiatown, and it could happen only in Sofiatown. Another thing is Shabeens are a place of dance and jazz, so they offer to preserve the culture. So Shabeens were illegal, but they were very popular in that that was what was happening. Freedom Square. So it was a very popular location for political protest. Nelson Mandela spoke there, and Fafi references it several times, saying that that's where they must protest. Another thing that happened in the time was there was a lot of crime, violence, and gangs. So these gangs were influenced by American media. Examples are Mingus and Charlie. They are gangsters. And another thing that was happening was the Bantu education system, and we see Lulu, she experiences it, she suffers from it, as I spoke on earlier. So all of these are what was happening in Sofiatown in that era in terms of the social and political context. And also another thing referring to the political context would be things like the Freedom Charter, the rebellion, and so on. And then finally, the importance of songs. So songs are a form of protest that expresses mood and feelings of characters. Not only that, but they comment and document events that happened and that were traditionally, purposefully undocumented. It was also, as I spoke on earlier, a form of alienation, and it's also showing the culture that was preserved by Shabeens, it being entertaining and lively. So that's Sofiatown. That is the play. Those are the big points, all explained with examples. Thank you very much.